welcome to the Land Pioneers podcast, where we get to meet and hear from some of the industry's most prominent land developers and influential experts. So listen to the gems and learn from the experience of these industry giants. And today's guest is James Polacek, the founder of Poly Property, one of the preeminent land and project marketing companies here in Adelaide. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Dan. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So, look, just in brief, James, with his background, has founded Poly Property back in 2020 after having worked very successfully at Colliers International. They had a residential projects branch here in Adelaide. And he's built a very impressive career over the last 2 decades in the residential property and project marketing industry. He's recognised as one of Adelaide's most respected land and project marketers, and still the only Adelaide-based project marketer to manage 3 high-density CBD apartment developments to build out success. East End Living on Peary Street, 140 apartments, Penny Place Apartments, 152, and the Adelaidean 74 apartments above the Adelaide Crown Plaza, all at the same time. Very, very cool. So the Poly Property team since then has led various well-known and high-quality infill projects to sell at success. Tribeca Bowden, 19 townhouses, Cadence, another 23, all sold as house and land, and Treno and Mylen, and recently a single contract townhouse project of 14 townhouses in Woodville Park, which sold out in 24 hours. Quite incredible. So James brings a practical blend of experience, market knowledge, and the ability to align design with buyer demand. His close collaboration with developers, planners, and architects ensures that each project is positioned for success from early stages through to completion. So look, I'm excited to dive deeper into what's made James and his team so successful and what our listeners can learn from dealing with the South Australian land development market, most importantly. But before we get too far into James's story, just a quick word about the sponsor of the podcast, and that's Eagle Vision. So with over 17 years of dedication to our craft, we've delivered 3D visualization excellence across 730 projects, including over 40 land estate subdivisions. So what makes Eagle Vision unique? Here are 3 of them, and where we may be a good fit for land developers around the country. Less is more, 24/7, and extreme transparency. Less is more, focus on strategy, not just pretty pictures, and having the background in property development and project marketing. The strategy aspect of 3D visuals is by far the most important component and takes priority over everything else. 24/7 around the clock. So our team, being based in Australia and Europe, we work on a 24-hour turnaround basis to increase the pace of delivery for our clients and their projects. And ultimately, extreme transparency, no surprises. We pride ourselves on creating utmost transparency in our operation, and we've built systems and processes to involve our clients at every step of the way. They get to see the machines in the workings and can track the project's progress infinitely. We're constantly on the lookout for new technology and what may best apply to solving our clients' problems. And whether it's AI or interactive visualization, we're constantly experimenting with it internally to ensure the best return on our clients' investments. So experience the future today. Visit us at www.eaglevision.com.au and discover a world of possibilities. Now back to our guest, James Polacek. So, James, how did you begin? What did you actually, why did it so excite you about entering into real estate?
Look, I think it's probably a slightly boring story, but I was always interested in property and architecture and business, and it sort of brought all of those things together. I think in my formative years, I was probably a little bit lazy and didn't like the idea of a 5-year architecture degree, so just decided to slide on in with some gateways, which were property management and residential real estate, and now, of course, probably for the last decade or so, project marketing. So it's just sort of one thing led to the other, but certainly started with a genuine interest and passion, and went from there.
Yeah, but look, coming from an architecture background and seeing what property transactions were looking like, I wonder whether that had a fairly big shift, because architecture is such a creative process, whereas property often feels a little bit more process driven. How did you combine the two together? Did you find any of that?
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the big contributors to my transition into project marketing. So the residential real estate landscape is uh, a lot of the same, with subtle differences. So running auction campaigns or expressions of interest or similar, and they're always focused on a single property. There's often not a lot of ability to influence what's happening because the home is the home. It exists. It's very hard to make changes prior to a campaign, apart from perhaps prettying things up with furniture packages and some nice marketing or a good photo shoot. Whereas with projects, I get the opportunity to spend months or even years with developers and clients to improve their product before we get to market. And so I think some of the best fun and most creativity that we get to have and impart on a project is actually sitting around a table, and sometimes it's over coffee and sometimes it's over wine, depending on how well we know our clients. But we play around with schemes and master plans and trying to drive. Sometimes it's land efficiency, sometimes it's incredible design, and you get to jump in the room with architects and planners and yeah, really have a positive influence on a project even before we've gotten to market. So I guess it's almost reduced the amount of time that goes into the amount of time I should say that I dedicate to sales, where a really large portion of our work and value add is actually before we've even spoken to a buyer. So I think that's ended up a really nice blend for me with the sort of architecture interest. But a lot of our skill set then gets to be applied to sales. So we learn so much through the planning process about a project. We get to know our team and our consultants, and I think that's part of the reason we're able to sell products so well, is because we know the thing back to front, because we're a part of that project team. So that's really nice.
Yeah, from very early on. How do you find sort of navigating this planning minefield of sorts within Adelaide and beyond? I'm sure, having been an architect, you can speak the same language to the planners and councillors and etc. But is it a real challenge?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm sorry, and to be clear, I'm not a qualified architect, but certainly with a keen interest in the space. I think I get the luxury of being able to defer to some of the planning experts. I guess my influence is probably at almost what you would call like a feasibility stage, but the challenge you refer to is very real, in that transitioning from what is viable from a planning standpoint to what is viable from a financial standpoint can often be very, very different things. And there is pushing and prodding and massaging that needs to occur to achieve optimal land sizes or dwelling sizes or sale prices. And the economics element of that blend of elements to create a successful project is actually becoming more and more difficult. So that's driven by dozens of things, which I'm sure we'll touch on a few of them today. But we have government policy and planning policy, which actually, whilst at its core is supposed to be driving things like housing affordability, can often actually do the opposite and make the job of the developer difficult and more expensive and more time consuming, which ultimately just time equals money. And so these are the challenges we face on a day-to-day level. And, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. But I also spent some time with the Urban Development Institute of Australia, the UDIA, which is essentially an industry body or lobby group who has constant and consistent communication with the powers that be at the government level to try to ensure that these decisions that they're making and considering on a daily, monthly, yearly basis are either better or, dare I say, less damaging than what they could be to the property landscape.
And reflective of what both parties are sort of trying to achieve, right? On one side, you've got housing challenges and the ability to provide more housing. And on the other side, the developers are trying to do the right thing and make a profit and create more housing. So it's just marrying up the two.
Oh, naturally. You make it sound very simple, Stan. It's the concept of it is incredibly simple, and it should be much simpler than what it is. And I think I'm very much a believer in generally open and free markets. And if the developers were allowed to go and do their thing free of restriction, would actually probably end up with quite a good result, even in the absence of planning legislation at all, because developers simply respond to the marketplace. And if the marketplace needs affordable housing, then developers do their best to provide it, because that's what will equal that profit that they're also chasing naturally. The artificial constraints from a planning perspective are not necessarily at all short-sighted, but trying to achieve the same things. They're just trying to achieve the same things differently. Recently, we saw some proposed changes to garage dimensions, because in government land there is a consideration or thought that people aren't using their garages for their cars because they're too small, and instead we've got these gyms in garages instead of cars, and therefore we have cars on streets, and that's where the problem comes from a government standpoint. So with a revision to policy there, which increases garage sizes by half a metre in width and even more than that in depth, that can significantly change the dwelling yield on a particular plot of land. It can change construction costs, and instead of creating a good outcome, we're actually working against the affordability problem. So what sounds like a small matter of trying to get cars into garages can get really messy. And I guess particularly in infill, where urban infill type projects, where you really want to drive affordability because you want people closer to cities and CBDs and within metropolitan areas where governments can invest in infrastructure, light rail, these sorts of things. We can find ourselves going in the opposite direction, and then we end up needing to essentially release more greenfield type land, which the state government in South Australia is doing quite proactively, and I think they should be commended on that, because that is absolutely helping things. But they could be doing better, in the sense that naturally a requirement to have a garage half a metre wider probably means a plot size half a metre wider, which probably means that the to make it up a 1,000 home release, which has been muted down south, could have been an 1,100 home release. So these small margins can create big results. And in SA, where we have, I think, something like a 15,000 home shortage over the next 10 to 15 years, every 50 or 100 homes is going to count for a lot. So yeah, it is absolutely a constant battle, and we're all trying to do the right thing, developers and planners and the government. But yeah, there's always wiggle room in between to get there.
Yeah, interesting. So how about on the macro level? There's been a lot of movement in the Adelaide's residential market over the last couple of years. Anecdotally, almost is like 20% year on year sort of growth, because it seemed that the market was so undervalued that so many of the eastern seaboard investors have decided to transition over, or maybe it was a local demand. But in either case, what about the short to medium term going forward in terms of where we're at right now?
Yeah, I think, as you say, we've had this mad growth spurt, which probably had been required for a while. I mean, I think the Australian property landscape changed towards the end of COVID and post-COVID type phase, where we had this transition to remote work, and the requirement to be in offices was lessened. That has equalised a little bit. I think there is a general return to offices, but not to the same level that we had pre-COVID, such that I think we're in a nice spot. I've just speaking to people out there, I think there's a nice balance of all these things, but it also means that from a property perspective, people can live away from their offices, and they don't have to be there every single day right on the dot of 9 and not being able to leave until 5. We've seen this flexibility come in, and I think that's changed the way that people are planning their careers in a longer term sense. So that's also affecting a shorter term behaviour. The careers that need to be started in a bigger city like a Sydney or a Melbourne, where that might be where that business is done. You can absolutely transition, for example, back to Adelaide, where it might be seen as a more relaxed lifestyle, a more comfortable lifestyle, a return to family, friends, those sorts of things. Because I think really over a longer term trend in SA, let's say 10, 20 years plus, I think the government refers to it as a brain drain, where talented, well qualified people essentially had to leave Adelaide to go and forge their career, make more money, chase these things. They're in a somewhat established phase, and I think in the short and medium term we're going to see the trend continue of people coming back to SA. I think the second short and medium term trend that we are going to see develop is the fact that our population is aging, especially in SA. SA has one of the oldest populations in the country, and it also has one of the largest boomer contingents, and the boomer generation is in a phase of downsizing. The approach to property here in Adelaide and SA has been to own your own quarter acre block and not be more than 10 or 15 k's from the CBD. And it means that we have lots of these types of properties that probably would benefit from urban infill, apart from naturally, characterful areas and these sorts of things. But we're also seeing this downsizer type of person transitioning from a quarter acre block with lots of maintenance, with an older home that requires lots of maintenance, to possibly an apartment style living or courtyard style living, which is on smaller plots of land, or no land in a medium high-rise apartment building. And this is opening up opportunities for developers from a land economics point of view, both at a small and a large scale, just because Adelaide has been caught behind the rest of Australia, or at least Melbourne and Sydney, in that we just don't have as many medium and high density projects that have occurred. That's probably one of the biggest shifts locally, is that generational change. The second biggest age cohort in South Australia is actually the younger cohort, in that sort of 20 to 25 bracket, and they are much more likely to want to be close to the city, and much more likely to tolerate a smaller dwelling. So that also potentially supports a shift towards higher density. And then the third largest group is interesting because it fills some of the gaps left by the boomers, which is in basically people in their 40s, late 30s and 40s, who are building families probably. So they're looking for potentially that quarter acre block that's being vacated. But they're also coming from maybe a smaller dwelling. So instead of chasing the 1,000 square meters, they might be comfortable with 300, 400, 500 square meters. And we're going to see product types change on that basis. I think we've seen, particularly in the Greenfields projects a little bit further out of Adelaide, sort of in that 10 to 25k radius, the plot sizes have come down in the last 10 years from 800-900 square meters to probably more like 400 to 600 square meters. And even though that is maybe I'd call that a medium-term trend, I think that's only accelerating, partly because of the things I've mentioned earlier, which is the economics of projects is such that developers are finding it really challenging to supply 700 square meter plots at reasonable prices these days. So that is also dictating buyer behaviour in the Adelaide market.
Yeah, and out of the three groups, do you find that the last group, the 32, let's say 40, late 40s sort of year old, are they open to be looking at attached housing styles, so medium density kind of townhouses in those land releases, or do they just want their own backyard and no neighbours kind of touching their walls?
Yeah, I think there's a mix of both, definitely. I think the benefit of probably going a little bit out of town obviously is going to result in a lower land price per square metre, so it's going to enable larger plots, or it's going to increase the affordability of those larger plots. And you'll see in the Greenfields projects that people are going to gravitate to detached homes, and standalone homes just for that comfort. These people in their 30s and early 40s are probably people that have grown up with boomer parents, and they've grown accustomed to the quarter-acre blocks, these freestanding double brick character homes, which incredibly expensive to rebuild today, and so that just doesn't happen. But certainly that freestanding home has significant appeal to that sort of person because it's so familiar. The people that are maybe at the bottom end of that age range are open to things like semi-detached or even townhouse type living, and quite possibly as a balance of compromise between somewhere between a 30 and 45 minute commute. They might want to bring that down to between 15 to 20 minutes or less. And the reality is that you just simply cannot find reasonably priced open plots of land of 500 square meters in the metro area for a total house and land package price of, sub probably $1.2 million or thereabouts. It's just not realistic anymore. So to get closer to town, the compromise you're making is you're either taking on a big mortgage or you're living in a little bit higher density in that sort of townhouse style, maybe a smaller courtyard home, maybe attached on one or both sides. We're certainly seeing more tolerance for it. But there's certainly a mix there, and that's, I think, long-term trend is changing to tolerate higher density.
Yeah, interesting. So look, the dream of having a big backyard to have a kick around of a footy, that sort of comes with a fairly hefty price tag.
Oh, look, it's a lovely thing, I'm in that sort of 30s age bracket and building a home, and I might not be typical because I'm in the industry and I probably have a bit more perspective than a few others, but I'm essentially building a courtyard home close to the city because I can't afford the quarter-acre block, and I'm quite happy with very low maintenance and lock up and leave style. I'm young enough where stairs are still not really a concern, and getting prepped for family life and these sorts of things. Whereas others that are not prepared to take on that compromise, they are absolutely flooding to these greenfields type projects and grabbing that 400-600 square meter plot, and they're building their single level 3-bedroom home with a nice big yard for a patch of lawn and the cricket pitch and kick the footy. Whereas equally, there are lots of people out there like me who, if you're buying into essentially infill, you want to get close to things like parks and reserves, because if you do ever get that taste of wanting to kick the ball around, you can hopefully within about a kilometre go for a quick stroll and have a kick of the footy. So there's a mix of both, absolutely. And buyers out there are more informed than ever, I think, just with to use an antiquated term, the internet age is internet information is so accessible for people. They can understand these concepts and they can actually quantify the decisions and the compromises that they're making. So we find more than ever when we're marketing a project of any type, be it urban infill or greenfields and house and land and these sorts of things, that people are there because that's what they want. They're not there to be educated on what they may or may not want. They come into our showrooms with a pretty good idea, which is both good and bad. It's hard to change minds, but we are educating less and less because people are self-educated, which is really good to see.
Yeah, so they're already pre-qualified. They know exactly what they want, and as long as you can provide that style of living, then there's a match made in heaven kind of thing.
This is exactly right. I think I talked about it before. A lot of our work is done before we go and sit in a showroom because we need to effectively predict what people are going to want, because otherwise it's just a revolving door and they're not going to like it and they'll walk straight back out again.
Yeah, that's it. One question I've got is, so we've got friends that are architects and that moved down, they were in the city previously, they moved to Port Wollonga. So for those that don't know much about the geography of Adelaide, Port Wollonga is probably about an hour or so out of the CBD. But
yeah, depending on where you're coming from, but 45 minutes to an hour for sure. A nice little, almost still a coastal getaway type spot.
Yeah, and they're running very happily their architectural business from there without having to commute to the city. Are you finding a lot of these professionals are looking for a study, kind of a dedicated study space when you're designing some of these greenfield master plans?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's I think it's almost like a must-have these days. You know, the way that we design homes is much more efficient than what it used to be, just because it is so expensive to build homes that the meter rates to construct them is high. So we need the spaces to work really well and to keep the overall cost down, but equally people are chasing space. If people are looking for bigger homes to accommodate a growing family, which let's say is loosely a 3-bedroom home, that's quite often the master bedroom with a couple of bedrooms filled up by kids, and there's not really any space for a dedicated workspace. So that inclusion of a study, whether it's a separate room or a nook or you know, the different scales of that obviously can vary quite a bit, but having space dedicated as a workspace, I think, is huge these days, because it actually doesn't matter whether someone's running their entire architecture studio 4 to 5 days a week from there, or whether it is simply a half to 1 day a week on a work from home arrangement. It's really difficult to manage without a dedicated space, which I think people are realizing. It's not really as practical as it once was to once a month set up on the dining room table, because that just doesn't work when you've got, you know, kids running around trying to run a household. It's a very, very high value inclusion. Not everybody needs it, but yeah, that transition away from the office on a more permanent basis is definitely driving that demand.
Awesome. All right, let's talk about a little bit about some of these land releases you were mentioning. So what kind of an impact do you think they'll have on the Adelaide market? Are there specific areas where they'll have more of an impact and less of an impact? Just talk to me a little bit more about the geography of where it's all going.
So predominantly our land releases that are being driven by government, so essentially land for residential use that otherwise just didn't exist because it was zoned rural or production or similar, are happening to the south and to the north of Adelaide. The northern releases have been happening for a while, and so that impact is not, that doesn't really exist, in the sense that land has been consistently released over a number of years, and there's huge growth in our northern suburbs and regions as a result. In our south, we've had much more recent announcements. I think up to around 1,500 homes in the last 18 months are essentially being added to a pipeline there by the government via land releases or rezonings, and I believe there are more in the works there. In terms of impact on our market, I think I mentioned a little earlier that we're essentially, over the next 10 to 15 years, we're about 15,000 homes short to meet demand in South Australia, or in Adelaide, I should say. So the release of 1,000 or 1,500 homes is assisting to keep up with demand. It is assisting with things like affordability. It is not that the time it takes to install infrastructure, get roads, get construction underway and built. I don't think it has a meaningful impact on the market by way of prices. I don't think the overall dynamics change. I think the supply of land is brilliant, because in the short term, it does keep land values steady. But that long-term demand for whether 15,000 estimate is right or wrong, obviously 1,500 is really only 10% of that. So I think prices falling is probably a long bow to draw, but certainly in the shorter term, you know, supply to keep up with current demand is, I think, a great thing, both to get people into new homes, but also to keep affordability in check. Even if it's short term, we could certainly do more, because I can see the prices still only really going one way over the longer term.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so let's now talk a little bit more about the specifics of project marketing. So you've had some fantastic successes with selling out projects, 14 townhouses in one day. Maybe that's boom time. But aside from the amount of time that you spend within strategy, is there anything else that you do to achieve that kind of success?
I think the answer is yes, but it's actually taking things back to basics. So I get asked this question regularly about project marketing, and yes, the sellout in 24 hours may or may not be isolated. That was around November last year, so we're still within sort of 12 months of that, and I wouldn't describe that as boom time. I think we were still in a reasonably balanced marketplace, but I think what happened there is we got the product type and price right for that particular location, which was in the sort of reasonably inner northwestern suburbs of Adelaide. I think the things that we do really well that put us in a great position for sales success are we look after everybody that we deal with, regardless of whether they're a buyer in the moment. So and this is sort of like your CRM style stuff and your customer relationships. So you might call us and have a conversation about a project that we have on the market at the moment, but realistically, you're 5 years away from a purchase. And I think in the game of sales, if any agent sort of hears that, they write that person off because 5 years is too long to really consider that person. Whereas I'd like to think we'll spend a good 5 minutes on the phone with you and try to educate you on what's going on currently and what might happen in the future and how best to set you up for success, understanding what might happen in the structure of sale that you're considering. So you might be inquiring about a house and land package and have no clue about progress payments or timing or land settlements or incentives associated with such a type of purchase. And so if you walk away from that conversation or experience, be it for 2 minutes, 20 minutes or 2 hours, if you walk away from that feeling really great and thinking, oh goodness, geez, James or Jimmy or Paul or any of the guys at Poly Property, they were so helpful. Every time they hear from us in the future, hopefully they remember that good experience and there's an element of trust built already. So I think that if that 5-year time frame for them changes and becomes 1 or 2 or 3, or even if it blows out to 6 or 7 or 8, the next time we speak to that person, we're not starting from scratch. We're starting from James, I remember you. You were far out. You were so helpful. Tell me about this one. Is this a trustworthy builder, developer, project? Insert the relevant question. And usually the answer is yes, because we're really careful about the product that we take on to make sure we're dealing with reputable developers and builders and organizations so that we can really stand behind that product. And so I think where I'm going there is we're building long-term relationships, and that doesn't always pan out that way. It might be 1 in 10, but equally, if we do that to the tune of 10, 15, 20,000 people, which is probably not far off the mark for our, I guess if you use the word database that we're building at the moment for people that shopping for off-plan property in Adelaide, in many forms, we put ourselves in really good stead to essentially market and sell these things, both with our approach, but also the collection of people that we have that already know and trust us and are much more comfortable buying, and they're much more comfortable buying quickly.
And it's that focus on a relationship, because you'll know that at some point of time, this person, if they are right now maybe engaged, then maybe at some point of time there may be, a larger house demand or whatever kind of demographic changes for the general kind of idea of what happens as people go through different stages of life. So you may then are able to offer different products along that way.
Definitely. I mean, you're getting into sort of really long-term stuff there, absolutely. But even I mentioned the boomer demographic, and their decision-making time is significantly longer than a first home buyer, sometimes upwards of 6 months. So we might meet a boomer type downsizer today, and it's the start of their journey. So they've thrown out a few little inquiries, and many times they might get ignored or get treated with disdain because they're so far off. And if we look after them, whether they turn into a serious buyer in 6 months' time or 2 years' time, then yeah, absolutely, we're putting ourselves in good stead. But so do we do things like in the backgrounds. Obviously, you mentioned segmenting of data, and trying to make some notes about somebody and what makes them tick and what they're looking for, and what would work for them timing wise, so that we have that context in the future. But also so that we're not doing the wrong thing. If we have someone come in with a really clear mandate that, I'll use the downsizer boomer example again. If some point in the next 5 years they're looking for an apartment, we're not going to start sending them house and land packages, because that would just be silly. So I think it's really easy to get caught up in treating a buyer just as a buyer and sending them all the stuff, and it's counterintuitive, because it just shows that you didn't understand what they were actually looking for. So I think, again, none of these things that I'm talking about are beyond what I would suggest are basics, but it's essentially doing the basics on repeat, being really consistent with doing those things well, because over a long period of time it starts to show. And it sounds really boring, but it's all process driven, but above all of that, it's really important to look, it works, but I think it's really important to be genuine in that approach as well. So it's all really nice to run a slick CRM with a cool process and doing the basics right, but people tend to forget that people buy from people, not from CRM systems. So I think if people walk away from experiences liking or trusting or believing that person that they dealt with, the brand, Poly property is not necessarily relevant. If they remember, the Paul or the Jimmy or the James, and think nice things about that person and the way they did their best to assist, then that's probably the most powerful thing of all.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about that baby boomer, empty nester kind of demographic. When they are buying off the plan, do you find they're more comfortable or less comfortable with it versus some of the younger, the Gen X kind of demographic?
Definitely less comfortable overall. These are the people that have possibly spent 20 plus years in the same dwelling and raised the family and seen the family grow up, and then seen that nest empty, and they're so familiar with that home, and they're so they can be very accustomed to what they're doing, which can build resistance to change. So often when they're dipping their toe in their water, dipping their toes in the water with us, which might be an off the plan apartment, for example, it might be any variation of a downsize. It's all very foreign. They may not have even transacted in real estate for 3 decades. So that is a big change. They need to re-familiarize themselves with that landscape and understand just the transaction itself. The fundamental change to the style of living from let's just say it's a character home on that 1/4 acre block with a big yard, into a single level apartment in close proximity with others as part of a community corporation, which can at times seem particularly scary. There's a significant familiarization exercise, and this is why their decision making takes longer. But equally, you can see now where it's becoming really important that the person that they're dealing with on the other end, be it in a sales context or even just as a friendly, helpful guide, if we can be consultative and helpful to that person, that's going to stand out, and that's actually going to help us sell more products. So, I think I say regularly to people, we actually don't really ever sell anything. It's very much we show people around. We show people our product. We show people why we think it's great. But the hard sell, I think, is dying a very fast death out there. And so that's, again, probably talks to why our pre-marketing phase work is really, really important, because if we don't get to market with the right product, we're getting stuck trying to run the hard sell, and it just doesn't work as well anymore. You're much better off essentially doing your best to be a nice person, hold someone's hand, teach them things along the way, and they'll become comfortable to make their own decision.
Yeah, great. How about the marketing materials? Do you find that they respond well to more marketing materials or less marketing materials? Do they want to see a frame stage up or any of that kind of concrete kind of proof that this thing is going ahead?
Yeah, proof is good, and the more proof is better. But I also think there's probably like a critical mass point of enough marketing, so to speak. So even though you or I might refer to it as marketing material, it's kind of it's just informing the buyer about what they're buying. So again, the more conservative or the more resistant someone is to making a decision because of their inclination to do so, the higher the threshold for comprehensive information for us to present to them before they make a call. So there would absolutely be a minimum standard, which you need sort of renders and plans in some way or form, plus master plans of either buildings or areas or similar. A comprehensive summary of amenities and what things are going to look like on an interior basis. But you can do all these things in different ways. Obviously, a lot of it is digital, but I also find, again, referring back to the boomer example, that the physical touch points are really important. So, having your samples on display, having things there to see, touch, feel, can really influence somebody's decision. We were recently discussing the quality of glazing in homes and in apartments, because these are things that are really important to people when they're in close proximity to others. Having samples on display and showing people so that they can literally see how thick pieces of glass are, gaps between glass, describing different finishes can be really impactful on people's ability to make decisions.
Great. So, James, that's all super useful. How about the display suites and the display homes in some of those greenfield marketing places? Are you finding that people are coming to those, or are you finding that you're having to go more to them and meet them where it's more convenient?
We see very little of going to them, to be honest. We very much see more of people wanting to come to us and see what we have on offer, particularly, combination of both greenfields and infill is that people want to see where they're going to be living. Sometimes it's an area they've considered previously. Sometimes it's a brand new area to them that they're being driven to for amenity, affordability, size of land, any number of things. But they're really wanting to get amongst it, essentially. Sometimes that's a motivation to actually see a physical product like a display home, but not as often as maybe what it used to be. I think people seem to be able to visualize their homes a little bit better than in the past, and the display home approach, whilst still very, very relevant, is not demanded as much as what it used to be, because people are familiar with digital marketing, digital information, these sorts of things. But also, I think people are getting used to seeing less physical stuff just because it's actually so expensive for developers to provide it. So some developers are opting to move away from it and potentially stomach a slower sales velocity by not quite having those things. But over time, and this is probably in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a transition away from it where people are more comfortable not having these sorts of things at their disposal. I think they do all help, but from a developer side conversation, there's certainly a return on investment discussion that is had more regularly than what it used to be a lock for requiring a display home under all circumstances.
Yeah, interesting. And what about the actual geography of the site? So there are some greenfield developments that can be built within sort of metro Adelaide or just on the outskirts and north and south and so forth, versus some of the townships. So Murray Bridge, Mount Barker, these are all kind of intermediate towns that takes a little bit of getting to.
Mhm.
Are you seeing people actively looking to move to those towns?
Yeah. The answer is yes, but I think people are always driven by a reason. So the core one for a while for Mount Barker, as a good example, was affordability, where people were prepared to commute into Adelaide and live in Mount Barker, which might have been a 30 to 40-minute commute. I think what's happened perhaps in the last 5 years, or even maybe a bit longer, is that commute has become a little bit longer with the growth of Mount Barker, the population out there, just general traffic congestion as that builds and stresses existing infrastructure, particularly our southeastern freeway, which is essentially at capacity, I hear, from a government level. But I think the drive to go to an area like Mount Barker is now less so affordability. Prices have also changed, by the way, in the last 5 to 10 years quite significantly. And I think people are now going to Mount Barker because they are prepared to make a lifestyle change and base their lives out there rather than be commuting into the city all the time. There are some occasions, of course, where people have got the ability to work from home, which we touched on, but these also have bigger home requirements, that study or 4th bedroom and these sorts of things. Murray Bridge, as another example, is that I think we are seeing very, very few people go as far out as Murray Bridge and commuting into the city. That's quite a decent commute, probably an hour plus in peak hour. But we also see significant investment into a Murray Bridge. So there's locally here, we have the Thomas Foods manufacturing plant out that way, and that is a significant economic driver for the Murray Bridge area in particular. And you'll see probably lots of people going out there for that employment and living their lives out there rather than making a compromise for affordability and commuting. That's not to say that doesn't exist, but it's just a reducing or declining cohort, shall we say.
All right, look, and finally, just switching gears a touch, young professionals looking to enter the project marketing, land marketing industry. You've been at this for a little while. What are your, let's say, top 3 tips for those kind of young professionals to become successful?
Yeah, I think we probably even touched on it in a roundabout way when we were talking about what we do to ensure success. Obviously, an individual is not going to build a significant system for their own utilisation. I think that person needs to be prepared to be really devoted to helping people in a general sense. So I think the difference there with project marketing versus, say, residential real estate is that I think we see people coming and going in residential real estate because the intent is potentially slightly disingenuous. There's a perception that you can roll into residential real estate and hustle your way into running a bunch of auctions and make some quick money and lease the Beamer, if I was to use a really popular stereotype, and make a few bucks with just hustle and selling hard, which to be honest, I think is realistic. People can achieve that. We do see it all the time with hard work. In project marketing, I think it probably just requires a little bit more nuance and preparedness to sacrifice time on things that aren't necessarily immediately productive. So, that Boomer that might not move for 5 years, but being prepared to dedicate an hour or two to them and help and educate them as a laying of a foundation for what might come into the future. So I think patience is really important. It's very much not something where you're going to get instant results. And I think I see the people that transition into project marketing in particular are either very patient or they do have grounding in a like industry as well. So some of my sales team have transitioned from the residential space, both in sales and property management. And they've done it really, really well because they do have that level of patience required. I've also seen some people transition into project marketing from similar industries. So from planning is one, and different areas of consultancy, because there's a level of patience and understanding of process where that can really help. Sometimes it's really hard for somebody technical to transition into a sales role because it's very much about relationships. So I think where I'm going there is probably just the understanding of time, because also the financial reward is also delayed. Often we are selling a product today and we might not get paid for it for a year or two, and that's a really important understanding to have. The second thing I think is being prepared to try to master a few things. So, to use an old term, a jack of all trades and master of none, which is probably not quite true, but having a desire to learn about the product that you're selling, because your intimate knowledge is part of what is going to inspire confidence. And again, to use a comparison to residential real estate, if you are selling a beautiful renovated villa in a nice area, which is inherently desirable and valuable, there's actually not a lot of hard work involved in selling the product. You probably still need to be a good negotiator and structure a really nice campaign, or a well-considered campaign. But you don't need to understand the style of construction or the specifications of the windows or the color and type and hardiness of your timber flooring, because it's all there for somebody to inspect and either take it or leave it. So a preparedness to really go back to school on your product. And we do that for every single project. I think to come up with a third thing, I think collaboration ends up a really big one as well. So a team ethos. Now, whether that's team from an internal perspective. So, for example, at Poly Property, we often end up with one or two or three people working on the same project at the same time as a group effort. So that involves a sharing of ideas, a sharing of success and failure, but also a sharing of financial reward. Whereas often, again, to make that direct comparison back to residential real estate, it can be quite solo at times. So it's you can live and breathe your own effort. The collaboration extends to project teams as well. So we might have, instead of 20 or 30 listings on the go, we might only have one or two projects on the go between a team of 3 or 4. But each of those projects have 20, 30, 50, 100 dwellings in them. So we might actually be managing 200 listings at any one time, but they are within 2 or 3 projects. And each of those projects has an extended team with an architect, a project team, a builder, a development manager, a project manager. And we are consistently and constantly in communication with all of these people to maintain our understanding of what's going on site, what's happening with the product. These things can change, the approach can change. We might be changing designs on the fly because of an engineering report. So it's very much a heavy involvement in a team approach. So I think even though those aren't necessarily 3 things to do to be better, I think they're 3 things that you just need to be really aware of as really key differences to residential real estate, which not inherently easier, but inherently much, much different in terms of your approach, because you can very much live and die by your own sword in residential real estate, which appeals to a lot of people, and some people it just doesn't suit. Whereas in our game, it's very much team ethos at all stages. So if you're not a team player, probably look elsewhere.
Project marketing may not be for you. So these are brilliant. So just to summarize, patience, dedication to your craft, and collaboration. Those were the top 3.
Perfect.
Kind of that I got out of that.
Spot on.
Very cool. All right. Look, James, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your insights, and I'm hoping that a lot of our listeners got so much value from it. And for the listeners, look, thanks for tuning in to the Land Pioneers podcast, where we get to interview some of the most prominent and insightful land developers and experts in the industry. It's been an absolute pleasure having you with us here. So, look, we'd always love to hear your thoughts, and remember to rate and share the podcast if you found that of interest. and click the subscribe button there so that you don't miss an episode. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.